In our past two videos, we talked about, first of all, creating a safe, positive environment for talking about issues and other conversations. We talked about, with us being stuck in quarantine, the tendency sometimes for people to just constantly argue and nitpick, and we can't stop fighting each other. What do you do with that? Today, we are going to go into the topic of forgiveness. Because let's face it, whenever we do have conversations or frustrations with our spouse, or we have arguments, there's a place for forgiveness there. As a matter of fact, it's an essential place for resolving these kinds of issues that we have in marriage. Now, before we get into this, we want to offer you 5 ideas or 5 concepts that will help you to frame forgiveness really well in your interactions and conversations with your spouse. But we want to acknowledge one thing. We acknowledge, first of all, that we kind of have some big ticket items in marriage that happen. I mean, put it this way. Forgiveness is required whenever we are offended, or whenever we are threatened, or whenever we might feel insecure in some way. There are big ticket things like abuse or addiction that offend and threaten. And then there are, I don't want to say smaller ticket items, but maybe in comparison, things like, he or she said something that was insensitive to me, or he or she keeps on doing this thing and just doesn't seem to regard my feelings on it. The way we go about handling those issues look different a lot of times. And therefore, forgiveness might look different between the big ticket things and the other ticket things. And we just want to say that if there's some big ticket stuff going on with abuse or addiction or those kinds of things, we really encourage you to seek some professional help. There's some good professionals out there who are trained to help folks with that kind of thing. So now that we said all that, Gina.
I think we need to acknowledge something else, Chris.
Yes, tell me.
I think we need to acknowledge that none of us are perfect, and that we all have said or done something that may have hurt someone. We've all said or done something that may make someone feel like we don't regard their opinion. So recognizing it's not always about someone else. Sometimes we have to acknowledge that we have the capacity to hurt our spouse with our words and with our deeds. So it makes none of us immune to needing forgiveness. So recognizing that is really important. It is also important that we have to put aside something we sometimes love to hold on to, which is our pride. And recognizing and acknowledging our missteps in communication and in action is really something we need to acknowledge also. And one of the first things, or the first thing we really want you to think about in terms of forgiveness, is that it's really a decision that you make to forgive. It's, for me, the next level of, do you want to be right? Or do you want to be in relationship? As someone who really enjoys being right, I have to make a decision that I would rather be in this relationship than hold on so tight to my pride and to my need to be right.
Yeah, and I think that also goes to say that because it's a decision that we make, it has to be intentional. I know that sometimes I can tend to just go, okay, I'm sorry, let's just move on. And nothing was really resolved or even forgiven. It was just something I said so I could end the conversation because it was getting uncomfortable. But it's got to be a sincere, intentional decision that you make, for sure.
The other thing I think people need to recognize about unforgiveness, I acknowledge I am a like to be right person, and I am a grudge holder. So sometimes me holding on to a grudge or that unforgiveness is like me drinking poison and expecting the other person to be affected by it. Because oftentimes the decision to forgive is a decision to free a person, and that's really yourself.
Mm,
But I have to recognize in my relationship with my spouse that the presence of forgiveness really doesn't mean the absence of frustration. I can be intentional about forgiving, but I still have to acknowledge the feelings of hurt or frustration that I still have to process through.
hmm So, one thing I'm really hearing you saying is that forgiveness is a process.
It is, it is a process. And it's not just the process, it's the communication where I literally have to talk through, and then I have to handle any emotions that come as a result of the process.
I'll never forget one conversation I had with my wife, Kristen. Um, some I did something. It was my fault. I own that. Um, and I said, it's really important for you to forgive me for this, and if you read between those lines, it's all
Mhm.
about me, right?
Yes.
And I said, do you can I get your forgiveness on this? I want this to be resolved. And she said something that was really, it taught me a big lesson. She said, I forgive you, I do, but that doesn't mean I'm not frustrated.
Hmm.
I need some time
Hmm.
for the frustration to go down and for me to start thinking a little bit more clearly. And I want you to know I love you and I forgive you, but there's still frustration there. And that can happen. That's an okay thing. It's a process to work through. And the person on each side has to understand that.
And I have to sometimes, for the relationship, go through that process.
Mm,
A lot of times
right.
you will, and I think we are alike. Sometimes you just want it over with and you want to put it aside, but
Yeah.
there are still ramifications if you don't deal with the emotions, the disappointment, the frustration, whatever you are feeling. You still have to make it through that to make sure that the relationship is reconciled.
So one thing I'm hearing you say, and this is really good stuff, is that whenever we go through, you hear about the argument that happened with a couple. They fought, they owned up to their stuff, forgiveness was given, and they came out on the other end stronger, right? Couples come out stronger on the other end, not because an apology was made, not because somebody just said the words, I forgive you,
Or I'm
but because,
sorry.
or just, I'm sorry, but it's because they went through a process. That's what makes the strength there. That's
It,
good stuff.
it really does.
Yeah.
And the second step I think we really need to understand is an apology is not necessarily a prerequisite for forgiveness. Let me say that again.
Mm.
An apology is not necessarily a prerequisite for forgiveness
Because
because
let's face it, a lot of people aren't going to apologize, or they don't know they did anything wrong, or they don't think they did anything wrong.
that's true. And I'm going to it's something that we talk often about. It's called radical responsibility.
Mhm.
And what are you willing to do, even if the other person doesn't acknowledge or admit that they did something wrong? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, you're just being a doormat.
Right.
No, when it comes to radical responsibility, I'm going in, especially with my spouse, I'm going in with my eyes wide open and acknowledging that I'm willing to make the first step first towards dealing with the issue and leading to forgiveness.
So, Gina, one thing that I hear you saying is that just because forgiveness is given doesn't mean there are no boundaries.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. but also recognizing why things have become such an annoyance. I'll be honest, we just bought a new house and we're out kind of in the woods and we're dealing with those little annoying ants.
Yeah.
And I know I am a lot more aware of making sure the floor is swept, the table is cleared, the counters, because any food droppings, they are on it like that.
Hmm.
And I have to be aware that sometimes the words that I use with my spouse, did you sweep the floor? Did you clean off your place? Those things are a big ticket or annoyance at 10 for me.
Yeah.
But for him, what's the big deal? I have to own that the perception that I have increases my frustration and sometimes the way that I may choose to speak to him. And I have to learn to ask for forgiveness as well, because for me it's a 10, but for
Mhm.
him it's a 1.
I think that it speaks to both sides of the plate there, though,
Mhm.
because really to be healthy, both people in the relationship need to understand what that scale is for each person. It might be a 10 or a 1 for him
Mhm.
and a 10 for you. That helps you to understand, okay, this is a big thing for me, and I realize it's not for him. So I've got to kind of issue a little bit of grace here.
I got to scale it back a little bit.
Right. It doesn't mean you can't voice frustration,
Correct.
which goes back to saying it doesn't mean there's no boundaries, but understanding where he or she is coming from. And then the other side of that too is, if I'm the person with the 1,
Yeah.
I need to be sure that I'm paying attention to what her number 8, 9, and 10 is, because I want to be, and maybe I need to go and apologize and ask forgiveness for not being sensitive to
Mm.
what's a 10 for her or
I
him.
think I think that would really benefit because, again, it helps me look at myself, but it also keeps our relationship in the forefront. Because sometimes for forgiveness, it's sometimes for us that I am willing to forgive.
Right. Yeah, that's a good concept to bring up, Gina. Why forgive in the first place?
Mm.
And we've already touched on this in some instances, and like you said, you're letting yourself uh, go. You're letting it go for you.
Mhm.
But I think also ideally, the process of forgiveness happens for the sake of us, to make us as a couple stronger. So that's really something to think about and consider. The third one, the third concept is, we want to encourage you to make forgiveness a mindset. And what do we mean by that, Gina?
What we mean by that is when you make something a mindset, it allows you to act in a way that it's important. It
Mhm.
allows you to prioritize things. And also for me, it stops me from scorekeeping or holding those grudges or what I like to call grocery list. You left the toilet seat up. You left your clothes on the floor. You didn't sweep up. And I just hold on to those things because I have 3 sons and my middle son is a real active athlete. So
Mhm.
when he goes and practices or he goes and runs, he comes home with his t-shirt soaked and wet. Like a boy, what does he do? He puts it at the bottom of his laundry. And as he's going through it, or I'm going into his room, I'm like, what is that? And it's that shirt that's at the bottom. And like that shirt, that smell permeates the entire laundry basket and the room. Sometimes holding grudges and grocery listing and scorekeeping are things that we haven't forgiven really stink up our relationship,
Yeah.
because it's just there and we never deal with it. And it just is allowed to, I like the word, proliferate its odor into our relationship.
So it sounds like when we consider forgiving the other person and what it takes to do that, we have to really keep ourselves in check.
Mm,
That there's not some underlying offense that happened way back when that has sort of colored the what it's like for us to extend forgiveness.
mhm.
We're going to talk about this in a minute, but sometimes we forgive, but with conditions.
Yes, yes.
And so when we have a stinky shirt at the bottom of the pile that we haven't dealt with yet, our forgiveness may not really be forgiveness. It may just be skirting over the issue, or it may be forgiving with conditions, or we're it's like we're taking off the cleaner shirt on top of the pile and expecting the stink to go away.
Exactly. But it also doesn't allow for our spouse to have an opportunity to win, because it, you are putting clean clothes on top of that. And no matter what happens, those clothes will be impacted by that dirty stuff that's underneath.
Right.
Recognizing that if there is something from the past we haven't unearthed, no matter how much our spouse tries in the present, that thing is still there and they just can't win. They just can't win.
They're always in the red. They're
They
always
all.
going to know something. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm.
That's such a great point. And going back to what you said earlier, if the point is that we want to be in a relationship rather than the right, we need to go back and erase the red for our spouse.
Exactly.
And that means
Exactly.
diving into the pile, picking up the dirty shirt, dealing with it, and putting it in the washing machine, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, number four, uh, in these ideas and concepts for forgiveness, is to make sure that you define exactly what it is that you need to forgive. This is important because first of all, it helps you to deal with one thing at a time. And especially if that big pile of clothes is there and you have to dig through, you separate the issues. And it's very important to separate the issues, right?
Yes.
And also, too, knowing what it is that we're forgiving helps us to continue the mindset that we're talking about. And when you can name something,
Mm,
then you can work through it. And that's important.
it really is. And recognizing that you have your own thing that's at the bottom and your spouse may have something at the bottom. So
Mhm.
that should allow for mutual grace and mercy. But recognizing that once you've named it, you can't put conditions on your forgiveness. You
There is
can't
no
say,
such, yeah,
go ahead, Chris,
I was going to say, there's no such thing as I forgive you, but,
or
or
I
I
forgive
forgive
you
you
if.
if. Yeah,
Exactly. It is, I forgive you, period, exclamation point.
right.
I still have these feelings, period, or exclamation point. I can't put conditions on your behavior for my forgiveness.
Now, there is a little bit of a differentiation we need to make there,
Mhm.
because that doesn't mean that there are steps that don't need to be taken when you're trying to solve a problem.
Correct.
Um, for instance, we were talking about this example earlier. Let's say that the spouse goes to Walmart and
Yes.
spends $50 on stuff that you think is like totally useless, and they didn't tell you that they're spending this money, and you know that money's already tight, and so there's a conversation to be had, and hopefully forgiveness to be given. It's not really forgiveness if you say, okay, I forgive you if you give me the credit card and you don't have it anymore.
Mhm.
Or I forgive you, but only if
Mm.
you tell me every time you go to the store to buy something and what it is you're going to buy. You can't do that with forgiveness. Now, if you need to work out a system to better, say, manage your money and to know what's going on, those kinds of things are okay, but don't make those preconditions for forgiving your spouse.
That that is really, that distinction is really key, because a lot of times when it comes to forgiveness, we may want to control how the forgiveness is given, when the forgiveness is given, and what I really expect from you for forgiveness to be total. And it,
Yeah.
all of those are strings, all of those are conditions, and forgiveness is really unconditional.
It really, I mean, the way I'm thinking about it too is that if forgiveness is a process,
Hmm.
the idea is to work through the forgiveness. You can't work through something to the end if you still got strings. Then you're just stuck in the process that's not going anywhere.
That,
So that's good stuff.
that is true.
Yeah.
And the last thing we really want to stress to you today is, remember that forgiveness takes courage.
Mm.
We have to be courageous to make that step to forgive our spouses.
Yeah, please hear what we're saying, folks. We don't want it all to try to communicate that forgiveness is something that we should do and therefore it's easy.
Hmm.
Forgiveness is not an easy thing a lot of times. Uh, if it's a process and there's conversations, hard conversations to be had, man, it takes an emotional toll on you.
Yeah.
It requires you to have the courage to explain how you feel
Hmm.
and the courage to own up
Hmm.
to how you contributed to the problem. So we just want to say that it takes a lot of courage to be able to go through the process of forgiveness. But what's on the other side of that is so rewarding for you and your spouse and your marriage.
I think it's really the courage that it takes to go through forgiveness well really causes the couple to draw in together,
Mm.
because you may have some people in your family, in your social circles, that are saying things like, I wouldn't forgive them, or if I was in your shoes. So it really also takes courage to stand up against friends and family to say, for this relationship,
Yeah.
I am willing to forgive. But we did have the conversations, because people really think forgiveness is like this, but it's not.
Mm-mm.
And they don't, we often haven't been taught a process through which we have hard conversations. We acknowledge our missteps. We acknowledge our spouse's missteps so that we can get to the other side. They just think we swept it under the rug. So being courageous to tell friends and family, I love you, I appreciate your care and concern for us, but this is a process we have to go through.
I think, Gina, we should wrap up with this. We've acknowledged just now, of course, that forgiveness takes courage.
Yeah.
It can be difficult, but there's a lot of good reward, and it takes to be able to not hear sort of the voices
Mm.
that are out there trying to say it's a snap decision to forgive or don't forgive. The more we train our brain
Hmm.
to do that, we have a saying that says, the more you go there, what is it?
The more you go there.
The more you go there. That's right. In other words, the more you choose to decide to forgive, to have a mindset for that, to understand that it takes courage and to define those things, all these steps, the more you do this, the more you're going to tend to keep doing that. And so we just want to encourage you that forgiveness is a wonderful thing in your marriage. I don't say that in any kind of a pithy way, but it is something that needs to be in the DNA of your marriage. And we want to encourage you with these steps, with these ideas that we've offered you today. Folks, thank you so much for watching. We hope this has helped you, and we encourage you to check out our other videos if you haven't done so yet. Have a wonderful day.